Namaskar. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Dr. K.R. Viswanathan, our today's speaker, Wing Commander Prafula Rao, President Save the Hills, Dr. Nima Doma Lama, Associate Professor, Sirdi College, distinguished participant, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great pleasure for me to welcome you to this webinar organized by Kalimpong Science Centre in association with Save the Hills, an NGO working on disaster management in Darjeeling, Sikkim Himalayas. I'd like to warmly welcome students, teachers, and parents from different schools, colleges, and universities. I, on behalf of Kalimpong Science Centre and Save the Hills, would like to welcome all of you in this virtual platform. The topic of this webinar is climate change, code red implication for the Himalayas. In this virtual platform, here with us, Dr. K.R. Viswanathan as an invited speaker. Dr. K.R. Viswanathan is an international specialist on climate change who works with Practical Action UK, an international charity which works in over 30 countries in Latin, South America, West East Africa, and South Asia. He was a major in the Indian Army before leaving to pursue a diverse career where he worked with the Swiss Development Agency and Government of India. He has authored numerous papers on climate change and environmental issues. Welcome, Dr. Viswanathan, sir. Now, I'd like to hand over this screen to Wing Commander Prafula Rao, President, Save the Hills, to initiate today's program. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. B.B. Gurung. Thank you again for inviting us for this second webinar, which we are doing with the Kalimpong Science Centre. As you know, we did a webinar about a week or 10 days back, and that was on using an app, a cell phone app for noting down landslide occurrences and how we can use the app very well to document landslides. That was the first webinar that we did, and I hope that this relationship between the Kalimpong Science Centre and Kalimpong and Save the Hills will continue. Save the Hills, as Dr. B.B. Gurung said, is a small NGO consisting of volunteers mainly, working on. We started working with landslides initially. That was in 2007. And as the years progressed, because landslides was related to rainfall and rainfall was related to other environmental issues, and of course, the other major disaster form, which is prevalent here, which is earthquakes. So we began working on a large, much more varied disaster form response. And our work has been mainly towards raising awareness, which is what we are doing today. The impacts of climate change are already being felt the world over and are projected to intensify in the future. And with this, I'm not saying that the recent occurrence of rainfall, which took place in Kalimpong last month in July 2021, was due to climate change. In fact, the danger is that we put everything responsible and make it, climate change is responsible for it. It may not be so. I'm sure Dr. Viswanathan will talk further on that. But then what happened in July rainfall last month was that on the 7th of July, we had 125 millimeters of rainfall in Kalimpong. 11th of July, we had 164 millimeters of rainfall. And on the 29th of July, we had 232 millimeters of rainfall, all coming with short bursts. It is not the whole day that it rained. It most probably rained for about 5 to 6 hours each time. And the total rainfall which occurred was 84% of the monthly rainfall for July came down within these couple of hours. So that is the problem these days. And it may not be due to climate change. I'm too ignorant to be saying that it was due to climate change. But certainly these things are happening the world over. If you recollect, Germany had its biggest flash floods in 100 years. They were not at all, such a country which is technologically advanced like Germany was not at all prepared for this type of downpour. And it killed, I was surprised that the fatalities in Germany went into hundreds. and so on with Japan. And with the USA, it regularly occurs. In fact, Ida has created problems with Hurricane Ida has created huge problems in the south of in New Orleans and all that. And closer home, of course, the Western Himalayas has had its more than its share of troubles this season. So it is necessary for us to know about climate change, and the UN climate change report has already sounded code red for humanity. And today we have Dr. K.R. Vishwanathan, who is a friend as well as an expert on climate change, giving us a talk, a wake-up call on code red. Because if we are not aware and if we do not protect nature, we cannot protect ourselves. So may I hand over the floorboard to Dr. K.R. Vishwanathan. Vish, all up to you.
Thank you very much, sir. Can you all hear me? Can you all hear me well?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Yes. Perfect.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm just trying to open my presentation. Just give me half.
Yes, sir. We can hear you.
Yes. Can you see the first slide, please?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
All right. Okay. Excellent. Thank you very much. At the very outset, I would like to convey my heartfelt gratitude to Dr. B.B. Gurung and Wing Commander Praful Rao, both of whom I know very well, and as well as to their organizations, Kalimpong Science Centre and SaveTheHills, for having given this opportunity to talk on this report, which talks about Code Red for humanity. Now, I think it's only appropriate that these two organizations, Kalimpong Science Centre and SaveTheHills, are organizing this. The reason I say that this is a report which is purely based on science, more of physical science. That's one. And if some of the implementation recommendations which are given in the report as to be done locally, you need to bridge the science with action. So I think it's only appropriate that you have, on the one hand, science, and on the other hand, maybe local action, Kalimpong Science Centre and SaveTheHills coming together to organize this. So thank you very much. And let me go to the next slide. Can you see this slide? Summary of the presentation?
Yes, sir.
Thanks a lot. Now, this is the summary as to how we want to go about. I will present to you some of the glimpses from the 6th assessment report of the Ipcc Working Group 1, together with the key takeaways from this report. And then we talk more, particularly about the implications of this report for the Himalayas and future action. Where do we go from here? Kind of how do we go about locally? And then finally, we arrive at questions, observations, and comments. And maybe I would suggest that you can put your questions or observations on the chat box so that one of you, probably Shreya, will collect them, and then we can discuss about it towards the end of my presentations. So that's how we would like to go about. Now, the 6th assessment report of the Ipcc Working Group 1. Now, even before I go into the report, a small question, to provoke our thoughts. I'm listing a few countries now. Estonia, Finland, Hungary, Mexico, Oman, Republic of Congo. These countries are in different continents, some in Europe, some in Eastern Europe, some in American continent, some in Africa. The one thing that is common is that only a few months ago, 2 to 3 months ago, all these countries set new high temperature records. So, I mean, this is to give a glimpse of where we are heading. Wing Commander Praful Rao talked about the floods in Germany. There were also floods in other parts of the world, for example, in China, in northern part of Turkey, and then there have been forest fires in Siberia, in Russia, in Greece, in a big way, in Spain, in Portugal, in the western part of Canada, around California and USA, you name it, you have. So this report, which is entitled Code Red for Humanity, comes as a kind of wake-up call, and that too a last wake-up call for us, not only for us, for all the nations, because the alarm bells here are really deafening. Now, I realize that we have in our midst people with different levels of engagement in the area of climate change. Some are professors, some are budding scientists, some are students, and all that. So, what I would try to do is to the extent possible, kind of not speak in scientific jargon and talk more in practical terms, so that we are all at the same level of understanding. First, a few words about IPCC. What is IPCC? IPCC stands for Intergovernment Panel on Climate Change. Now, this is a kind of a UN type of a body. This was set up way back in 1998, jointly managed by the World Meteorological Organization, WMO, and UNEP, a United Nations Environment Program. So, IPCC is in a way a scientific advisor to the whole world. It advises all the nations on issues of climate change. So, it's a kind of a scientific advisor. So, it has more than several hundred scientists on their panel, and I think it's important to mention that all these scientists, many of them are leading scientists in the world in different fields, ranging from agriculture to weather to climate, into atmosphere, into energy, physics, etc., etc. So these are all eminent scientists, but they work on a voluntary basis and on an honorary basis. This is because IPCC doesn't do any original research on their own. What they do is that the research is going on all over the world in different academic institutions, high institutions of higher learning, in the government, etc., and scientific institutions. They try to put together, especially the peer-reviewed publications and findings, and then try to synthesize and make a sense out of whole what is happening. So I think it's important to have a broad understanding of what IPCC is. So IPCC's recommendations or the reports are widely accepted, and nobody dissents about them, because it is strongly based on science. It's rooted in science. So what we had on the 9th of August recently, this year, this was published, the assessment report of the Working Group 1 of IPCC. Now, the IPCC comes out with the assessment. This is the 6th assessment. The 5th assessment took place 8 years ago in 2013. Now, this assessment has 3 working groups. The first working group we are dealing with is based on physical sciences, the climate change aspect. The second working group is based on vulnerability and adaptation. And the third working group deals largely with mitigation. So how do we, kind of in future protect our Earth from the impact of climate change by reducing emissions, etc. Now, only this report has been published in 2021. The remaining working groups report, the 2 and 3, are expected to be made public in 2022. Some of you, most of you rather, will be aware that IPCC was awarded with the Nobel Peace Prize way back in 2007. So this Nobel Peace Prize was jointly shared by IPCC as well as the former Vice President of US, Al Gore. It's also a matter of great pride for India that on behalf of ICC, because at that time, Dr. Pachauri, who was the former Director General of TERI, he was also Director General of IPCC, so he received the Nobel Peace Prize on behalf of IPCC. So it's important to note here is this IPCC report is authoritative because it's rooted very strongly in science, and it is competent. Every country accepts it, and it's as I said, it's a kind of a synthesized report. It's a coherent synthesized report. Sixth report of IPCC Working Group 1 had about 230 plus authors, all leading scientists in their own areas. And they hail from almost about 45 countries or so. And they poured over 14,000 publications, especially of the last 10 years or so, before they arrived at this. And then not only that, they also went through more than 78,000 reviews not only on their work, not only on these publications, but also on the report of the IPCC. I think this is important to note. Now, I think it's important for us to look at some headlines of this. Not very comfortable to any of us. That's why they have named it as a code red for humanity. One of the some of the key findings include that the human activity, the human interventions have been driving up the planet's temperature relentlessly and irreversibly. They say irreversibly because there seems to be no coming back at this point of time, and in a very unprecedented way. I think these three words are important. We'll come to that in a little while later. Relentlessly, irrevocably, and in an unprecedented way. And the report also presents scenarios of especially bleak scenarios of large-scale collapse of climate systems of the Earth, which is going to be extremely difficult to manage, especially if we don't achieve net zero emission in about 30 years from now. This is because many of the changes are already locked. So even if we do some, like for example, whether the melting of Arctic ice, once it melts, it's all locked in. It might take several hundred years for it to solidify. So I think that's why we talk in terms of irreversible. Similarly, glacial melt. So even if we manage to hold on to this emission, it might take several thousand years for the glaciers to get formed again. So I think this is the point we need to understand. So I go into the next slide. Yes, this report is in a way timely, also because we have in 3 months' time the COP, meeting of the COP, 26th meeting of the COP 26. COP means a conference of parties of the UNFCCC, which is United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, coming up in the Scottish town of Glasgow in United Kingdom as early as in November. So lots of many aspects of this report will be discussed by those 20,000 to 30,000 people who will be assembling virtually or otherwise to discuss the report. And I think it's also important to note that UNFCCC and IPCC has 195 countries. A majority of countries are part of this, and they will also be discussing because Government of India and all the governments will be sending their kind of a team to participate in this COP26 in November. Now, the report talks in terms, the report also comes at a time, as I said, part of the world was burning, that's in US, in Canada, in Greece, in other parts. Drowning, we talked about Turkey, Germany, China. And the third part is starving, whether you take it Libya or Syria or Yemen. So you have, the other developmental issues, and the climate change is coming as adding a layer to those, issues and a problem. I go into the next slide now. Yes, I think this is the point I forgot to mention here. The recent changes in the climate are widespread. When you say widespread, it is felt across the world, across the globe. They're rapid. They are setting in much faster than we could have ever thought, and are intensifying. So, kind of it is going in an exponential way. So everything is getting intensified. And as I said, unprecedented in thousands of years. So I think each of these, kind of words is important for us. Key takeaways from the report. The IPCC report itself, as I said, is based on publications, based on scenarios, based on various case studies, as well as simulation studies. We do a lot of simulation studies as far as climate is concerned. Some of the key takeaways, because I think we are talking about what the report talks about the world as a whole, then we come to the more local, that's the Himalayas. The global temperature has already spiked 1.1 degree centigrade above the pre-industrial level, which also means between 2010 and 2019, the increase in temperature is 1.1 as compared to 1850, 1900. So it's already gone up. You might ask as to what 1.1 degree increase means. Actually means a lot. It's something equivalent to like our own body. If we say, if we have a normal temperature at 37 degrees, and imagine if 2 degrees more, I mean, what kind of, issues, impact it creates on us. So I think that's the way the globe would also feel. So within the next 20 years or so, the temperature could easily breach 1.5 degree mark within 20 years by 2040 or so. And the warming could exceed 2 degrees by the end of the century. That is by 2100. You all are aware of this Paris Accord of 2015, when all the countries of the world agreed and committed to reduce their emission such that the global the temperature increase doesn't go beyond 1.5 or 2. 1.5 was the extra ambition, so it shouldn't go beyond 2 degree centigrade. But if we go the same way as we do now under the existing emission trajectory, the likely increase is estimated to be around 2.7 degrees by 2100, which is very, very severe. And we do not yet know all that will happen if the temperature goes up to 2.7 degrees centigrade beyond, when you compare it 1850, 1900 level. And the past decade, again, 2010 to 2019, has been hotter than any 10 years in the last 125,000 years. So this decade has been the warmest. And every year within this decade is becoming more warmer than the previous year. Now, why is it? You all know about the carbon dioxide accumulation in the atmosphere. The atmosphere is not able to deal with this extra carbon dioxide. It's important to have carbon dioxide in the atmosphere because it prevents excessive heat from getting it prevents the planet from becoming very cold. It traps the heat, because if you look at the ice ages, the earth was so cold, and then you have the interglacial period when the carbon dioxide level went up. So, but never in the last few million years the carbon dioxide concentration exceeded 300. I think the last time it exceeded 300 parts per million was 3 million years ago. 3 million years ago, it was around 300 parts per million. At that time, the sea level was about 25 meters, mark my word, 20 to 25 meters more than what we have now. And at that time, the temperature was 2 to 4 degrees more than the pre-industrial level. So you could say about 3 degrees more than what we have. This was the state during the interglacial period 3 million years ago. But even at that time, the concentration level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere did not exceed 300. Now it is 420 parts per million, and it is increasing at a rate of 2 ppm every year. I think this is also important to mention. But then on the other hand, you have pollution occurring, and then there is what is called as aerosol effect. Aerosol effect also occurs because of volcanoes, which spew a lot of particulate matter. So aerosol essentially consists of particulate matter, and they, when they are present in the atmosphere, have a bit of a cooling effect. So I'll go to the next slide, which will explain these changes in a slightly better way. Yes. I mentioned about the three broad reasons for global warming. It's what we call as climate forcings. The human interference, that is the most prominent one, over which we have certain control. Other one are natural drivers. What are the natural drivers? It's energy emitted by the sun, and also the Earth rotations and galactic variation, etc. And of course, then the internal variations which occur from time to time. So you find that on the x-axis you have the year 1850 to now, and then the y-axis is 0.5 degree increase, now minus 0.5, and then 0, and then 0.5, 1, 1.5, and 2. Where are we now? Now in 2020, we are at 1.1 degrees above the pre-industrial levels. We go into the next slide. Yes, I was mentioning about the effect of aerosol. You can see this, kind of the light green area where, but for this aerosol effect, the warming will be even more, up to 1.5. Because of this aerosol effect, which is because of the particulate matter, it is masking to some extent the global warming, and we now have 1.1 degree increase, not 1.5. But if this aerosol effect is not to be there, we would have already reached 1.5 degree more than the pre-industrial level. So that is where we are. I go into the next slide. Yes. So enhanced carbon dioxide concentration, which is going up rather relentlessly, highest in the last 2 million years. And because of this, there's also sea level rise, which is more prominent now from 1960 onwards. The sea level is going up by almost about 3 millimeter every year, 3 millimeter every year, uniformly across, but in some places more, some places slightly less. And Arctic sea ice is lowest level in several thousand years. And this is also important because of the increase in 1.1 degree. There's rapid melting of these ice sheets in the Arctic. So by 2050 or so, I think this is important. By 2050, it is expected, or it is likely, that we will have ice-free summer at least once in Arctic. At least on 1 year, by 2050, we may have ice-free summer, which is really unthinkable. And then the glacier retreat, we'll talk about it more in the coming few minutes. It is unprecedented in the last 2000 years or so. And the human influence, so hot extremes, so it's not only kind of ocean warming up, increase in sea level rise, etc. since 1970s, but also hot extremes, because in some part of the world is kind of you have these extremes of temperature, like for example the heat island effect, because of in addition to global warming, we are also running huge number of air conditioners and all that, and then kind of resorting to use of only cement and glass. With the result, you have what is called as heat island effect in the cities and all that. And then what are the changes that we see to the frozen areas of the planet, which is as I mentioned, global retreat of glaciers since 1990s. We'll come to that a little later. 40% decrease in Arctic sea ice since 1979. We are talking about the ice in the spring, and then decrease in spring snow cover since 1950s or so. So we'll go to the next slide. And you also, observe that this brings the warming of the globe, brings enormous changes to the water cycle. The water cycle, which is dependent on land, ocean, frozen regions, and atmosphere, the water circulates among all this from atmosphere to the land to the ocean and then back to the atmosphere. You all know about that. And because of this warming up of the ocean, so the number of cyclones, number of typhoons are also becoming more frequent and more intense. And this is happening together with the dry seasons and drought. For example, even within the Himalayas, when you come to the Himalayas, there will be valleys which will be experiencing the heat effect, the heat waves. So we continue with the takeaways. The Arctic is expected to witness ice-free summers at least once by 2050, because Arctic warming is about 2 to 3 times more than the average global warming. Decrease in spring snow cover, we mentioned that highest since 1950s or so. And the evidence, I think this is important to understand here. The evidence that we have now of how the human interference is directly responsible for the evidence for the extreme event is very strong now. In the last assessment report, the 5th assessment report, this was only high confidence level. But now the link is much more proven scientifically, because the assessment report goes by also certain probabilities, starting from medium confidence, high confidence, medium probability, high probability, very high probability, nearly very certain, etc., etc. So these are various levels of probability they kind of indicate. So in this report, this link has been proven much more than the previous assessment report. And then we talked about the sea level rise. So if nothing is done, if the emissions are going to intensify, we will have 2 meters of sea level rise by end of the century, 2100, and as much as 5 meters by 2150. This is also because the sea expands with a higher temperature, that's one, but also because the melting ice sheets in Arctic areas, Antarctic areas, in areas like Greenland, Canada, Siberia, etc. All this is going to relentlessly push the sea level rise to almost about 5 meters by 2150. And then increase in deep ocean acidification. A few years ago, 20 years ago, the pH of the most of ocean was around 8.2 pH. You have acidic and alkaline. So it was 8.2. Now, 2020, it is 8.1. You can ask what is the difference in 0.1. 0.1 decrease brings about 30% more acidification of the ocean. So I think this is the impact. You can imagine if 30% more acidification of the ocean occurs, what will happen to all the sea creatures? For example, this acidification affects the absorption of calcium by all those, the sea creatures. What will happen to all those shells? They'll all become very brittle because they cannot absorb calcium as efficiently as when the pH of the sea water was 8.2. Now it is 8.1. So what kind of impact it will have on the ocean dwelling creatures? And this is also accompanied by a gradual exit of oxygen. So deoxygenation of the ocean. I go into the next slide. I'm coming to the Himalayas now. So you could see the sea level rise now from 1950 onwards. It's going up. Right now in 2020, it's not much. It's around 0.2 meters from pre-industrial level. But then if you talk in terms of how the kind of a trajectory or the scenario which relates to unmitigated fossil fuel use, you can see it's going up to almost 2 meters by 2100 or so. I go into the next slide, which is implication for the Himalayas. Heating up of the Himalayas. We have already seen as to the disaster in Kedarnath in 2013, and also that was because of GLOF and very intense rainfall in Uttarakhand. And as recently as in February in 2021, when huge chunks of snow, possibly permafrost and rock, fell down onto the Ganga River, resulting in the flash floods, and several people perishing in that flash floods. So it's all because of the heating up of the Himalayas. Because if you remember well, when the Chamoli floods took place, the rains were not that much. But then, if you look at the temperature rise, the Himalayas in that particular area was heating up much more maybe than the other parts. Now, glaciers are going to melt, and they're going to melt quickly and shrink irreversibly. This is bad. Indian Himalayas has somewhere around 10,000 glaciers or so, but then only around 30 glaciers are more closely monitored in terms of mass balance studies, etc., etc. So the Ipcc report says that glaciers across the world, there is retreat in principle, because glaciers are retreating in the Alps in Switzerland and France, also in the Andes, and also in the Hindu Kush Himalayas. But within Himalayas, in Karakoram, they are a bit more balanced and stable. But overall, there is or even within India, 10,000 among 10,000 glaciers, majority of them are shrinking, but a minority of them are also advancing. So I think this is a situation that you have. So the decrease in glacier volumes and snow caps, and together with amplification of permafrost thaw. What do we mean by permafrost? Permafrost is when the ground or the land become frozen, and then it remains so for at least 2 years. We call it as permafrost. So in the Himalayas, upper reaches more than maybe 20,000, 22,000 feet, you will have permafrost. Or the Trans-Himalayan region, you will have permafrost. In the Arctic region, you will have permafrost, Greenland, etc. So permafrost is thawing, and that is going to have great impact in the Himalayas. Especially the ice there is holding the rocks together. When the ice melts, these rocks are going to get loose, and these rocks are going to fall, and they're going to fall somewhere into the glaciers, and then into the rivers, and then they're going to come to the plains. So you might have flash floods, landslides, possibility of GLOF, glacial lake outbursts, floods, etc. And this is together with more intense and more frequent rainfall. Why do we say more intense? Because when there is increase of temperature of 1.5 degrees above the pre-industrial level, the rainfall over land, I mean, this is in principle, is going to be about 10.5% more. Not only that, and it's going to occur 1.5 times more frequently. So what it means for the Himalayas is that we are going to have more intense, more frequent rainfall. But if you take India as a whole, like for example, on an average, we talk about 100 hours of rainfall on an average across India. I'm talking of the mean. So for India as a whole, this number of hours of rainfall is going to come down. But the intensity of rainfall within these 100 hours or maybe 90 hours or 80 hours is going to increase immensely. The way that Wing Commander Praful Rao mentioned what happened in Darjeeling and in Kalimpong in the last couple of months or so. And all this will contribute to decrease in areas which are snow covered, and also the snow elevations will also rise accordingly. And this has been also proven that the monsoon are going to become erratic. The South Asian monsoon is going to become erratic, and nobody knows how its behavior is going to be. Certainly, intensification of rainfall will occur in some areas, and when the monsoon become erratic, that's going to affect the Himalayas also in a big way. And simultaneously, this is also going to cause more, kind of a drought, especially agriculture and ecological drought also, because some areas are not going to receive much of rainfall, even within the mountain. Maybe some valleys, etc., are going to suffer. And I mentioned about how the rainfall would go up with the global warming. IPCC has brought about some calculations over there. The heat waves, not only in the plains but also in the Himalayas, they're going to become intense, maybe for a short period in the hills during the month of March or April or so. But then they're going to become more intense. At the same time, the cold wave conditions, the number of cold waves and all, is going to become less severe and less frequent. This is also important, and the incidence of forest fire will go up. We see that already happening. I think recently you had in Darjeeling and Kalimpong forest fires, and forest fires are occurring everywhere in US, Canada. Even with more sophisticated technology and machinery, they're not able to control. Imagine if this happens in the Himalayas. I go to the next slide, which is pictorially representing extreme heat, more frequent, more intense heat events, heavy rainfall, more frequent, more intense again, increase in drought in some regions, even in Himalayas for that matter. For example, because of drying up of springs or something like that, more of forest fires, and of course ocean warming, ocean getting acidified, and also losing oxygen. I go to the next slide, and I have 3 or 4 more slides before I conclude. Implications for the Himalayas. Yes, compared to the other oceans, with the Atlantic or Pacific Ocean, etc., Indian Ocean is warming up faster than other oceans of the world. And this is going to be a great threat, not only to the coastal areas, which are going to experience more frequent, more intense tropical cyclones, but also the Himalayas, because it's the same cyclone which kind of landfall in Orissa or West Bengal. It comes to the eastern Himalayas. So Himalaya is going to be affected by the erratic monsoon, which is going to also affect the Indian Ocean temperature, going to warm up, and that's going to result in more tropical cyclones, and implications for water security, food security. Even we hear of several hill stations, maybe more in the in the western Himalayas, going dry during the summer months, and those tourists coming there looking for water rather than appreciating the beauty of the hill. And then going to have impact on health because you're going to have more of insect population because of increase in temperature. So all this dengue to malaria and all that move up in terms of in terms of the altitude, and the energy crisis, because the hydro reservoirs are going to be not going to be full, or they're going to overflow for that matter, because the disaster situations. And there is potential for mass in migration. Why do we say this? Because if the coastal area, India has something like 7,000 plus kilometers areas of coastal areas. If these areas are going to be affected, especially because of sea level rise, etc. So, and these coastal areas are more thickly populated in terms of population concentration, and then they might migrate in course of time to the hills. So there's a potential for the Himalayas to face mass in migration also. And then the drastic environmental and ecological changes, for example, hastening up of biodiversity, which is already getting lost also because of deforestation and all that, drying up of the springs, phenological changes, we call it. What are these? Like, for example, butterflies appear not when the flowers are there. Flowers bloom, and then butterflies come in a month later. So these are phenological changes. So butterflies have to come when the flowers are in bloom, so that the pollination takes place. Or when you have the worms, kind of be available when the migratory birds come in. If the migratory birds come in and if there are no worms available, they can't feed their young ones. So rapid deforestation and desertification. So I'm coming to the last few slides. Please bear with me. Yes, what do we? What can we do about it? Is there a hope? Is there a hope? We seem to be being, in a kind of on the hilltop. Can we be pulled back from that precipice? Yes, yes, there is still hope, but then there is need for strong, immediate, and this is important, immediate and sustained reduction of emission by all concerned, all of us. Need for all countries to put their heads together to achieve a net zero emission. And for us, an additional challenge is how can we achieve this with higher levels of development? I think because more, poor people are, kind of moving up in this thing, so they will need more carbon. With this, how do we still achieve net zero emission? Enhance funding for adaptation and mitigation, transfer of appropriate technology so that we we organize the adaptation and mitigation in a more effective and efficient way, all-round capacity building, climate proofing of infrastructure, investment adequately in climate services, water services, early warning, etc. And then I come to the virtually the last slides. Now, this presentation only provides a very fleeting glimpse of the Ipcc Working Group 6, Group 1 report, because the whole report runs into 4,000 pages. So what we try to do now is to provide a glimpse of the report. The objectives are, one, so that we all become more interested, we read more about this. It also stirs our collective conscience. I think it's important for us to act, and if you have to act, we need to be touched. And unless we know what is happening, we won't be touched. So we need to be touched by these, and then so that we act and move. So it has to shake our collective conscience and inspire us to act, actually. And then it also should help us to scientifically record, because we are talking about Kalimpong Science Centre, and all of us somehow being part of that, scientifically record and share these changes at the local level. What's happening in the Himalayas? Can we record them so that we, after recording it, we analyze it, we share it, this thing, what is happening locally and how does it relate to what is happening globally, and discuss and share our knowledge on mitigation, adaptation, and of course, do something and even celebrate small successes. I think it's important for us to even celebrate small successes and actively, act collectively at the local level. How? By designing, planning, and implementation together with the government, together with other local bodies, together with the private sector actors on adaptation, disaster risk reduction, early warning, like what we are doing in landslip project now, together with UK as well as organizations in Italy and the Geological Survey of India. So early warning systems, not only now for landslides, but also for floods and for earthquake, etc. So I have now come to, I'm sorry, I've taken maybe 10 minutes longer than I thought. So questions, observations, comments are welcome. And for any additional information or clarifications, you can write to me. I don't claim to know everything, but then in case I'm not able to answer some of your questions or comments, I will certainly consult my learned colleagues and consult the literature and come back to you with a response. So thank you once again for giving this opportunity. I hand you over back to Wing Commander Praful Rao.
Thank you so much, Vish, for making a very, very complicated subject very simple for people like us. I will now request Shreya, who is the General Secretary of SaveTheHills, to take over and handle the rest of the program, including the question and answers and so on. Come.
Um, so does anybody have a question? Please put it up on the chat box. And I think Mamta Desai would like to, Professor Mamta Desai would like to say something.
Yes, I am Professor Mamta Desai. I have some inquiries from my own observation. I would like to ask you, have anybody all over the world have calculated or the ratio in between accumulation and melting of snow all over the world? And secondly, regarding climate change and landslide, the main causative factor is the faulty land use pattern, and ignoring the slope facing or degree of slope or excessive plastic usage, which block the drainage lines. Then I am thankful to you, sir, that you are very much correct that the human interference is the main causative factor by large-scale deforestation. Then another question, it is my observation, is there any connection in between recent tectonic movement under the Indo-Pacific region and the warming up of the sea level and the frequent cyclones in the Southeast Asian region? Regarding, and lastly, regarding recent widespread floodings in the Himalayan region, I think construction of numerous hydropower projects and dams are, to certain extent, are responsible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Desai. I could only partly hear what you mentioned. Your first observation was about the snow cover, wasn't that? Can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Yeah, no, I mean, if somebody can, break down this question one after the other, because I couldn't hear her properly. There was the echo.
Am I audible now?
Yes. Your first question was about the snow cover.
Yeah.
So what is the question, ma'am?
Calculation between the melting and accumulation of snow all over the world and the off-season snowfall in the Middle East countries also.
Well, I won't be able to answer this question, but I will be in a position to get you some response after consulting my colleagues. Because I think one part is climate variation, which will occur, kind of irrespective of the climate change. The other one is anthropogenic climate change, which is irreversible. So if there is snow occurring in some parts of the Middle East, it could be because of certain climate variation. Variation have been existing for millions of years, but climate change is irreversible, and so I mean, I don't know whether I have answered your question, but I think some of the freak events that we see is also because of climate change. Because, for example, the monsoon, the erratic monsoon behavior, that is also been attributed to climate change. If monsoon behaves erratically, maybe brings at some point of time more to rain to Rajasthan as compared to maybe Assam. I mean, we can't attribute that to climate variability, because the climate variability is that, like, for example, we used to have in India, every 5 years, there used to be 3 years of drought, especially in states like Maharashtra, Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, Karnataka, etc. This has been a regular feature. That is climate variability. That's been going on for the last maybe several hundred years also. But then the climate change has to be seen on a different pedestal. Your second question was on
Landslide.
landslide. Yes, I mean, we are not undermining the importance of human interference as far as construction of roads, etc. is concerned. So even if the road constructions are stopped in the Himalayas, the climate change will continue to occur. So what we try to do by faulty road constructions, by having cut slopes which are not scientifically valid, what we are doing is we are hastening the damage which are otherwise getting caused by the climate change. So whether it's pollution with the plastics or blocking of the drainage, etc. So even if the climate change is not there, this is going to go damage. So with the climate change, you're going to have more damage with these pollution and other human interference.
And regarding this question,
yeah,
the warming of the sea level, is there any connection in between recent plate tectonic movement under the Indo-Pacific region, which may warming up of the ocean water, and frequent cyclones in the Southeast Asian region?
Well, the literature clearly points out to a link with the rapid warming of the Indian Ocean to more frequent cyclones, especially the super cyclones, which is affecting the eastern coast of the country. Because if you look at the number of super cyclones which are affecting the eastern coast, they are more frequent now than they were 20 years ago. But the point relating to the movement of the Asia-Pacific plate and warming up of Indian Ocean, I have no knowledge actually, I must accept.
And my last question was the floodings and widespread flood and floodings in the Himalayan region. Is this not the reason behind that the numerous construction of hydropower project and construction of dams, ignoring the fault line and etc.?
Well, I would look at these as development issues. Development issues which become more complex, complicated because of the impact of climate change. Like, for example, even without climate change, if you're going to store water in huge quantity in the dams, there could be earthquakes because, the Eastern Himalayas is in a very highly, seismic region, maybe 4 or 5. So even without climate change, I mean, if you're going to store more water in the hills, I mean, that might cause damage because of the earthquake, etc.
RIS.
Isn't it?
Reservoir-induced seismicity.
And by the climate change is going to compound it because of increase and in frequency and intensity of the rains and the storms, and these kind of hydro reservoirs are going to fill up at very short time and in quick time. I mean, they're going to fill up within a few days and going to cause problems because the rate at which the water can be let out will always be much slower as compared to the rate at which they are filled up, especially during these times of intense rains. So my request is also to others who are not more knowledgeable in these areas to also respond and take the discussion forward. For example, Dr. Gurung, Madam Nima Lama, Praful Rao, others. Please.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. So we have another question by Jane Pochuri. He's asking, has COVID-19 pandemic lockdown have a positive impact on the environment since March 2020?
Yes, I mean, but I don't know whether we should be happy about it or not. Yes, one could say that, like for example, from Saharanpur in Uttar Pradesh, one could see the Himalayan peaks and all that. The dust and the aerosol seem to have cleared temporarily, but everything is back now. But that is not the solution, because I think kind of during the COVID time, people lost their employment. Poor became much more poorer. People lost job opportunities, and development came to a standstill. But then we want a kind of a more sustainable development, because we need, kind of a basic facilities, water for everyone, food for everyone, shelter for everyone, clean air for everyone. So we are moving in that direction. If that is the case, I think we need to have the macro economy has to improve. Livelihoods have to improve at the lowest level. So yes, I think COVID contributed to at least at the local level clearing up of the environment, maybe less of pollution. But one report says that COVID had not contributed to reduction in carbon dioxide concentration. There is one of the Ipcc authors says that yes, COVID may have contributed to reduction in the pollution, but not to reduction in carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere. So if it has not contributed to any reduction in the carbon dioxide concentration, and it's going up as it was, so it has not made much difference to climate change. The COVID lockdown. So not so much COVID, it's the COVID lockdown what has done.
So we have another question by Usha Lachumpa. She's asking, we cannot seem to stem the flood of tourism and pharma and hydropower related infrastructure development and increasing corporatization encouraged by governments. What hope does our region have?
Well, that is where I come back to my favorite theme of adaptation. So often we talk of, when we talk of adaptation, we say it is the old wine in new bottle. Actually, it is not. Because when we talk of adaptation, because adaptation is responding to climate change. And when we do that, we build on development. Because the Western countries, we say, are in a better position to respond to climate change because they have a higher level of development. Their educational level is high, their capacity is high, their skills are high, their earnings are high, their ability to move is high, their ability to receive, process, and act upon early warning system is high. They have houses which are constructed not in precarious areas as we in developing countries do. So, if we have to respond reasonably to climate change, so we need to strengthen that base, the base of development. So when you say base of development, strengthen educational institutions, strengthen health facilities, strengthen social infrastructure, ensure financial inclusion, all that. And then over and above, ensure that we develop further and then respond to the future adaptation deficit. So development deficits have to be responded first and foremost, and over and above the adaptation deficit. And what we are now talking about, influx of tourism, we are not in a position to manage, or setting up of pharma industries in the hills or the hydropower. These are kind of development dilemmas, development deficits. They are also associated with climate change. So, but I think we need to have the development deficits addressed in a proper way and ensure that, everyone sits across the table and try to develop win-win solutions. Like for example, mountains are most, especially the Indian Himalayan mountains are more ecologically fragile and vulnerable. So we need to have extra level of protection for them compared to areas, other plain areas. So is it possible that the not only the communities but also the representatives of people, bureaucrats sit together and evolve solutions which are kind of a win-win for everyone. So that's my response to that.
So I think James has a question. Do you want to,
Yes,
talk?
please.
Okay, great.
Thank you. It's so wonderful to get an opportunity in this very, very international standard kind of a meeting. Thank you so much. And it was a very wonderful thing to listen to you, sir. Such a technical, scientific subject you have made it palatable for the generic people like us. I am from Nagaland, and I have been part of this Hazard Center and this group, and I've been learning a lot. My question, which has been placed in the chat box, is also is one dimension. The other dimension is about the so-called solutions that you were narrating, and you were mentioning about sustainable development and all those basic requirements, health, food, agriculture, housing, etc. I work in Action Aid, an NGO, and I know that there is a rhetoric and there are a lot of things in between that. So sustainable development also is a very cliched term, and it's being misused by many agencies, which you may be more aware of. So from the indigenous tribals Adivasi point of view, they just need the protection that the rights give them. Forest Rights Act, PESA Act, and Chota Nagpur Tenancy Act, all that. And in the Northeast, the 6 scheduled areas, which are going to be heavily impacted, going by the scientific basis that you mentioned. So I feel that solutions have to be more nuanced than just making those big statements about sustainable development. Everybody is making, not you alone. You have gone into the nuances. That is very good, but then it is more nuanced than just saying that sustainable development is required and health, infrastructure, education, and all that, which will require a lot of resources. But I think for the Adivasis or even the Dalits don't need so much of development. They need land, which is a big problem now. So give them the land, and their farming will be taken care of. It's not so simple as I said. That is one dimension of it. And another one is, if indigenous peoples' lands all over the world are having 80% of the biodiversity intact, and therefore acting as a carbon sink, why are solutions not based on protecting the rights of indigenous peoples, in whose lands biodiversity is massive? Whatever is remaining in the world is in the indigenous people's lands. So why are we not talking of these issues? In fact, the word indigenous peoples itself is being covered under the carpet. There is a lot of politics in that. Thank you, sir.
Right. Thank you very much. I think you have raised a very important point. Now, kind of these indigenous people, Dalit, Adivasis, they were not responsible for climate change. I would say more than 80% of the population of India now consumes so less of carbon, and they cannot be blamed for the climate change. Of course, the Industrial Revolution of 1850, and then followed by development in the West, which was largely based on fossil fuels, was responsible for sending up so much of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And now we are faced with the situation where, when we want to develop, the Western countries say, sorry, I think India is the 3rd largest emitter, and then you have to agree for net zero emission. So I think we are, here with the dilemma. That is one dimension. The second dimension, if you look within the country, at least about 5% to 10% of the population in country, I mean, who are well off and all that, they are consuming much more than average Western person would do in terms of carbon. whether it's the use of cars, use of other energy-intensive devices, etc., etc. So that 5% of the population of India, which is rich, which may or may not care about climate change, is, kind of even exceeding the Western, kind of use. I mean, that's the second part. So what are we talking here about? So I think we need to have some kind of an equity in carbon use, even within the country. Leave aside the other countries. Within the countries, when we talk in terms of the carbon emission, we need to talk in terms of equity, which also means that people who are well off slightly, or the middle income people, or the higher income people who are using unsustainable level of carbon, have to somehow find ways of reducing their carbon consumption. And at the same time, the people who are at the lowest rung of society, not only in terms of income or employment opportunity or social strata, we somehow need to ensure that their consumption of carbon goes up, actually, because I think if they come into a higher plane of development, higher level of development, they would naturally consume more carbon. May not be to the level of this 5%, but I think the reasonable consumption of carbon can be envisaged. This is the second point. So we need to have not only this intergenerational equity, but within the country, we need to have some kind of equity. So we may be having low per capita consumption of carbon when you compare to any other country in the world. That is because your 80% of the poor are not consuming anything at all. They don't have electricity at home. Even if they electrified villages, the electricity may not reach their home. They don't have television, they don't have refrigerator, they don't have the cars, they may not have even two-wheelers, etc. And how are they going to consume carbon? So I think this is the point we need to discuss. Now, we have any number of kind of rules, regulations, laws, even within the constitution for bringing kind of development to the doorstep of the tribal people, indigenous people, Adivasis, Dalit, etc. I think we need to put that kind of statute into action. We need to put all the legal provisions into action. The reason is also because the climate change is also going to affect them badly. Because if I'm a forest dweller and if I don't have much to eat, that forest is to, whatever I'm getting out of the forest in terms of minor forest produce now, tomorrow I'm not going to get, because this climate change is going to, wipe out whatever little forest that we have now. So these people are going to be affected much more than you and me as a result of climate change. So they need to be protected. So what is the way to protect? So that is build on development. So we can't just, so this is the reason. So whatever we do in the area of development, whether you talk of education, you talk of health, you talk of agriculture, you talk of bridges, you talk of roads, you talk of the social sector. So we need to ensure that an element of climate risk management is built into each of this. So gone are the days when people used to talk in terms of standalone adaptation and all that. Now we almost always talk in terms of integrating adaptation with development. For example, if we are constructing a small check dam, I'm not talking about hydropower projects and all that, in Nagaland, because you have, kind of several watershed projects on, if you're going to construct a small, kind of a check dam or something like that. So how to climate proof that that kind of an infrastructure. So even when, maybe 2 degrees centigrade rise in temperature in Nagaland, for that matter, if there are going to be more floods and all that, how that small structure is going to withstand. So I think climate proof of physical, social infrastructure is very important. So, again, my argument is more, when you talk of adaptation, how do people cope with climate change? Always it starts with the base of development. Strengthen the base, make use of existing provision, make use of existing infrastructure, the funds, etc., to do what is already, kind of what we have already given ourselves in terms of laws, rules, regulations, etc. And over and above, bring in an element of climate risk management. And when I say climate risk, also disaster risk, because climate change and disaster risk are two sides of the same coin. I don't know. I've answered. I think you have raised larger fundamental issues. What I've done is to provide some response, actually.
It was more than the expected response. Thank you so much, sir.
So thank you, sir. I don't think we have any question, but I have a question of my own. So basically, the IPCC document has given us the final warning, and it has strongly blamed blamed humans. And so you talked about how this high confidence, low confidence, that thing happened. So why did it take 30 years? As in, they say it's the final warning, but before this, we did not get any sort of, a strong warning towards this. So then how is this decided? Like, how can it take this long to finally blame humans?
Well, the point to be noted here is that, kind of irrespective of which country burns more carbon, everything goes into the atmosphere, and you have one layer which is common to the entire humanity. Like, for example, if we burn fossil fuels, or the US burns fossil fuels, or the Japanese burn fossil fuels, the carbon dioxide is going to go and get lodged in that ring, which is uniform across the world. So that is what we measure as 420 ppm now. So, which means that, the climate change negotiations in the last 30 years or so have dragged on so much because every country is only telling what the other country should do and not what they should do. So I think things have to start with self. So I think the enlightened countries, maybe including India, have started thinking, okay, let's not, harp on this, that we have the, very high level of population, our per capita emission is very, very low and all that. So we should be allowed to burn more fossil fuels. No, that argument is gone. We are no more talking about that. We are saying that we have a bar of efficiency. Now, we will try to improve our own, this thing. We are not going to compare ourselves to any other country. We have certain level of, efficiency as far as carbon use. We will try to, kind of raise this bar and then go to the next stage and keep that, and then go to the next stage. At the same time, ensure that the poor and the dispossessed don't suffer on account of that. So that is the stand that India has taken now. So I think that is the stand. Maybe many countries will also this thing. Let's not say that you have to, kind of reduce your emission. I don't have to, reduce emissions, etc. Because, if we go into that this thing will not get anywhere. So if nothing has happened in the last 30 years, it is because of the bickerings, bitter bickerings among the countries in terms of how the problem should be tackled. So I think, this warning has come in a very timely way. It's something like, when you set up alarm in your mobile phone or in this thing, it gives this thing, every 5 minutes you can always say that, no, I want to sleep 5 minutes more. But this is the last warning. That's what the IPCC says, no? No more. We can't give any more warnings. It's for the nations to put their heads together, their hands together, and then work in a cooperative way. Everyone has to somehow ensure that how that country will achieve net zero emission in the shortest possible time. So hopefully, kind of, because the impact of climate change is also, in 20 years, 30 years and all that. So we tend to accord more importance and priority to problems of today than problems of tomorrow. To the problems of tomorrow than problems of the next year. I think so. One of the reasons. So the kind of attention that disaster risk reduction has invited, which is much more because the disasters are here already affecting. So there is the early warning. There's other. It has advanced quite a bit, but climate change adaptation is a bit slow to take off, and this is the reason. And we are only hopeful that this wake-up call comes in a timely manner and on time for the nations to act actually collectively.
And so may I add to that, please, Dr. Vish, to
Yes.
what you've said?
Yeah.
If
Please,
I'm audible.
please, Animaji.
Yes, thank you so much. You've explained it very well. I hope Shreya is satisfied. But that was a very pertinent question that she has raised. Like, why did it take almost 30 years for this action to be given? This red alert has been given now. Actually, as far back as I can remember, ever since we're in college, that was way back, we still used to have warnings of climate. We knew what we were doing to the environment. We knew that all the action that we were taking as a collective society, it was detrimental to what was really happening to the environment. Okay, but basically, I think because there are so many students present here, what I'd like to impress on everyone is like we are so leave aside what the governments are doing. Okay, the government of India is going to blame the government of USA. China is going to blame the Western world. The Western world is going to blame India and China. This will continue at their level. Okay, the academicians and the scientists have been doing what they have always done. They have given us warnings. Okay, but what have we, as a human collective society, what have we done to mitigate the adverse effects of climate change? That is very important. I think this is where we need to start. The government at the level. See, if I say, let us not have development, let us stop carbon emission, will the next generation agree to that? Are you all going to live in a society where you're not going to get internet access? Are you going to make sacrifices where you're not going to get accessibility in roads? You're not going to get accessibility in terms of electricity? Are you willing to make that sacrifice to save your environment, to save the planet? I doubt any of you will agree to that. Okay, so here what I feel is I think we are all partly to blame on two accounts. Number one, it is the level of hypocrisy that we have. Okay, it is the level of hypocrisy and this finger pointing, this what we like an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, and the whole generation is going to be blindless and toothless. Okay, that type of attitude that you have, it's always the other person who's making the mistake. It is not us. Okay, so what really needs to be done is, am I willing to reduce my carbon footprint? All of us who raise questions and say that there's too much carbon emission, okay, will I, as an individual, am I willing to cut down on the use of air conditioners in my home? Am I willing to take less flights? Am I willing to reduce the protein, the meat in my diet? Okay, so these are changes that need to be addressed. So even at a personal level, I think it becomes very, very important that we, especially the younger generation, like the mistakes that our generation has made, we've come to a situation now where it has become almost irreversible, that climate change, the effects like 2 degrees Celsius, it seems to be inevitable now. Okay, so what are the effects that we are willing to, what are the sacrifices we are willing to make? And I think there should be more introspection, I think, on everyone at the personal level, individual level, at the societal level, and obviously at the governmental level. I think that becomes very crucial. Others, I don't think there is much hope if we continue with this selfish attitude of just thinking of our ways and what needs to be done for my good and my comfort and ease, I think. Thank you so much.
So you're on mute.
Just to put in one sentence, what you say is that let's all contribute to leaving the world. When we leave the world, leave it in the way that we found it. That itself will be a big thing, no? I mean,
Yes.
that itself we would have done quite substantially, because everything has to start with I and we. And I think that's where in some states, like for example, state of Kerala, panchayats have done a lot. They're not waiting for the state government. They're not waiting for the government of India to come in. And they have done not only adaptation activities, but also mitigation activities. What they have done is that integrate this climate risk into their panchayat plan. Their panchayats, some panchayats maybe 5,000 population, some panchayat maybe 10,000, some panchayat maybe a large 25,000 population. But then they have been given a kind of untied funds to spend on kind of development. So in their planning, what they have tried to do is that integrate this element of climate change and disaster risk into their planning. and then kind of not only implement them locally, but also monitor them, evaluate it carefully as to how they've been able to achieve to some level of climate resilience actually.
So thank you so much, sir. There are 3 more questions, but if you could please send me your email address, and we'll try, due to time constraints, we'll try getting back to you.
Yeah.
So
I'll do that. I'll do that.
No, sir, I have asked them, and I will forward you their queries and their email addresses.
Thank you very much.
So first and foremost, thank you everyone for attending and for giving us your time. Thank you so much, Dr. K.R. Vishwanathan, for readily agreeing to talk. And thank you, Dr. B.B. Gurung and the Science Centre for hosting such a wonderful webinar. Thank you.